Okay, on a very sad anniversary note, it's been 25 years to the day since the passing of the great Ayrton Senna, and of course that race weekend at Imola there was also the passing of Roland Ratzenberger in the qualifying session on the Saturday. Those two deaths had a massive impact on the sport of F1 and on motorsport in general, with track safety features and new safety features being brought in for both saloon car and single-seater racing. What happened at Imola was actually avoidable. The fact that the FIA persisted in taking the San Marino Grand Prix to Imola after those two fatal accidents and also allowed Grand Prix motorcycle racing to take place at Imola in the years following stuns me. Superbikes still race at Imola. Touring cars still race at Imola. The track itself is actually inherently flawed as a track because of where it is situated and how it is actually designed. Even with the safety features they put in place, some corners are actually now seen by some drivers as more dangerous than they were pre-safety features being implemented. Obviously, that race weekend is also famous for another accident involving Rubens Barrichello, where his car bounced badly, and because of the aerodynamics package that was in F1 at the time with the rules that were allowed, the car flew and actually landed belly up on the crash barrier and basically snapped in two and basically broke Barrichello's spine. And he was very, very lucky, A, to escape life-threatening injury, and B, actually to still be alive. At that point, alarm bells should have been ringing with the FIA and the race organisers. They would have had drivers' briefings before the qualifying session and the free practice, and obviously the race. You have drivers' briefings before every session you go out on the racetrack. It's a compulsory thing. You have drivers' meetings before every day of track events if you're involved with those track sessions. At which point, they would have had the pre-qualifying safety briefing as well, and the drivers' briefing. And questions were raised about the safety of Imola before Roland Ratzenberger's death. Obviously, Roland Ratzenberger's accident, very few channels actually had the qualifying live back in the early 90s. But I believe Eurosport had the qualifying live at the time. But programs like Grandstand would have had highlights of the qualifying. And of course, that had a massive impact on the British media because a lot of the teams were based in the UK, including Ratzenberger's team, which unfortunately went out of business shortly after his accident. They folded at the end of the season. Ratzenberger's accident was actually more dangerous and more serious in an accident sense than Ayrton Senna's. It's also overlooked. People forget who Roland Ratzenberger actually is. He was a young Austrian driver who got a ride in F1, and his death is always overlooked and forgotten because Senna died the next day. Ratzenberger's death also contributed to the safety changes that were brought in following that fateful race weekend at Imola back in the mid-spring of 1994. It had also had a massive impact on Senna mentally going into the actual race itself. Now, Senna had been struggling that season, was under a lot of pressure in both the media and in the paddock, because there was a young German called Michael Schumacher who would go on to win 2 titles with Benetton before going to Ferrari. Now, the accident that involved Senna was more down to the car failing as well and careering him off with a steering failure and a suspension failure, which ultimately did claim his life. But however, the force of which he hit that concrete wall with no give and a very limited runoff before you hit the wall, the very small gravel trap, also contributed to the forces going through his body. So had he not even suffered the severe head injuries that he did that would have ultimately claimed his life, it's very likely that he would have had a similar fate to Ratzenberger anyway. But people forget that Roland Ratzenberger also died that race weekend. In the aftermath of the fatal Imola race weekend, safety changes were implemented by the FIA at both tracks and cars. So safety changes were made with gravel traps being removed over time and replaced with tarmac and concrete runoff areas, which actually on some tracks have made them even more dangerous because there's nothing to decelerate the car before hitting a massive barrier. They've increased the amount of use of tyres and foam barriers and changed the Amco and changed concrete barriers to Amco barrier, which has more give and absorbs more energy, which has also contributed to some really spectacular accidents over the years. Drivers like Fernando Alonso and Kimi Raikkonen will attest to that. Later on in the 94 season, and this is also overlooked, is Mika Häkkinen had a really terrifying shunt as well that gave him severe back injuries. Gerhard Berger had some massive accidents as well. And in 95 and 96, there were also some pretty serious accidents involving some high-profile drivers, including Jacques Villeneuve, Martin Brundle. There was Pedro Diniz, his car caught fire and exploded mid-race at Jerez in '96. Luca Badoa managed to flip his car at Interlagos as well. It's a very similar accident to Martin Brundle at Melbourne, where you were allowed to have the spare car. He had two very almost parallel accidents on the same day. So even after the death of Senna and Ratzenberger, serious avoidable accidents where the way the cars were designed, the aerodynamics package that was allowed on the FIA rules at the time, were actually contributing to some really dangerous kind of life-threatening accidents. Come 1996 onwards, new aerodynamics packages were introduced and phased in. Yet there were still some really serious accidents that resulted in some really serious injuries to drivers, including Michael Schumacher and Olivier Panis breaking their legs at Silverstone and at Montreal a few years apart. There were some other serious accidents at Spa, which led to some circuit changes at Spa. But as time went on, they worked out that Imola itself could not be modified enough to allow Grand Prix racing of MotoGP and F1. It just could not be modified to a safe enough standard that would meet the FIA regulations for those two competitions to take place. So Imola has been dropped from all Grand Prix racing. It just does not meet the required standard required by Grand Prix racing. The way the track is designed is inherently flawed and actually makes it one of the most dangerous race circuits of all time. Not because it's actually claimed the most lives. There are other circuits such as Monza and Thruxton that have claimed more lives. But because of the way it's laid out, it cannot be modified enough to meet the current safety requirements that the FIA have in place for Grand Prix racing. There's not enough areas to move barriers, including the Tamburello corner, which is obviously synonymous with Ayrton Senna's death, where Gerhard Berger a few years before had an accident that resulted in his car catching fire and leaving him badly injured himself. And in 1992, 2 years before Senna's untimely death, he and Gerhard Berger, after the drivers' briefing, voted that they themselves, as Gerhard Berger was involved in an accident and Ayrton Senna was the head of the drivers' union alongside Alan Prost as joint co-heads, walk that corner, and they felt changes were needed to Tamburello to make it safer, that if there was a serious accident, at least there would be a chance the driver could live. What they saw shocked them. Tamburello could not be modified anymore because behind the concrete wall that killed Senna is a sheer drop into a river, and you could not move it. And they shrug their shoulders and go, we have to deal with what we've got to deal with. Even now, Imola is one of the most testing and challenging circuits on the world. But the safety features that have been brought into F1, such as the Halo device, which came after Jules Bianchi's timely passing, and the design of the nose cones, the cockpit, the hands devices, the various other elements on the cars come from this accident. And if you look at tracks like Spa, which are very similar to Imola in their testing nature, their length, their high speed, you'll notice gravel traps have been removed in favour of concrete and tarmac runoff areas, which, if you remember Nico Rosberg's championship winning season, he had an accident in qualifying that was really serious, where he just did not decelerate. He hit the barrier at 180 odd mile an hour after going flat out over Eau Rouge. He had a tyre failure and went straight into the barrier. It was a testament to the safety of the car he was driving that he managed to walk away and race the following day in a repaired car. If that had been 15 years ago, he does not race the next day. He would have been injured. So the safety of the cars, the crash cell, the chassis, the subframe have vastly improved since the untimely deaths of Ratzenberger and Senna. Also, the severe accidents of Villeneuve, where he broke his back, Schumacher and Panis breaking their legs also have contributed to the crash structure of an F1 car being so inherently safe. Obviously, Billy Munger in Formula 4 has lost both his legs after breaking them. They could not save his legs. So there are still ways to go when it comes to single-seater racing to make all single-seater formula inherently as safe as possible. There are still near deaths and fatalities. John Surtees' son was killed by a flying tyre, which should have also brought in the Halo device 10 years ago. So it's taken a long time and a lot of accidents and incident to make it as safe as possible. I'm not a fan of single-seater racing because there's risk and then there's too much risk. And the way single-seater racing leaves the driver so exposed in the cockpit, even with a Halos device, their flying bodywork and other things can still get into the head and neck area, which cannot be protected unless you put a Perspex dome over them, like a fighter plane. But there we go. It's been 25 years and so much has happened for the positive and the negative in single-seater racing, because IndyCar still has fatalities to this day. Justin Wilson being a prime example of a top-quality driver whose life was taken by a flying wheel. Felipe Massa being hit in the head at the Hungaroring by a bit of failing suspension off the back of Barrichello's car. Even then, nearly a decade ago, they are still waiting until this last season to bring in the Halo device, even before Jules Bianchi's fatal injuries claimed his life. Massa, having that blow to the head, nearly died, and that sent shockwaves again through the F1 paddock. So sometimes F1 can be a bit slow on the uptake of safety, and at the same time can be exceptionally reactive. They need to be more proactive in their safety. There's still areas they can improve, but also they can also alter the tracks and bring gravel traps back, because they decelerate cars a lot quicker than runoff, which you just keep going until you hit that barrier. The fact that barriers are safer is great, but the fact the cars don't decelerate, that again raises the risk, like an Alonso-style accident at Melbourne where the cars cannot decelerate in time. So there we go. Thank you very much for watching. I thought I would do a bit of a lengthier video on this one. Please like and subscribe. Place your thoughts below. And I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.